The places where the Europeans first set foot among the Aboriginal people are now known as the Atlantic provinces. So we have New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland. Later, in the 1490s, explorer John Cabot claimed Newfoundland and parts of Nova Scotia for the British monarch, followed by Francis Jacques Cartier claiming other parts of the Atlantic provinces in the 1530s. Settlements of both French and English were built along the coastlines, with other Europeans also making their way across the ocean in the following years. Today, Atlantic Canada has a strong Scottish, Irish, English, and French heritage. Our ethnic diversity is somewhat slim, but it's growing. New Brunswick's two official languages are French and English, making it Canada's only officially bilingual province and the home to the only French language university east of Quebec. This draws students from the French-speaking countries of Africa, for one, and many of them also end up immigrating to the area. We also have a few Dutch and a growing Asian population. Much of the same way as our history is an assortment of our European ancestors, the economy of Atlantic Canada is an assortment. We have a large tourism-based industry, but the Atlantic provinces also have vibrant industries in aerospace and defense, aquaculture, biotechnology, energy, information and communication technology, research and development, and our favorite, agriculture and agri-food. We have nearly 9,000 farms. Go one more. Okay. We have nearly 9,000 farms and about 1 million hectares of farmland in the region. Total farm cash receipts for the Atlantic provinces in 2010 came to about $1.45 billion. Approximately 17,000 people are employed on our farms in Atlantic Canada. We're also home to about 1,000 food processors, providing more than 33,000 jobs. Potatoes are the region's #1 most important cash crops. I guess that's corn. But you know, we'll go to the next one. There we go. Atlantic Canada produces 42% of Canada's potatoes. Last year, that had a farm gate value of about $366 million. But we're not all about potatoes. You'll also find oats, canola, barley, soybeans, apples, blueberries, strawberries, cranberries, grapes, and root crops, maple syrup, and Christmas trees are also produced in the region. The province of Nova Scotia is one of Canada's largest producers of Christmas trees. The industry is worth $30 million a year and involves about 3,500 producers, many of whom are also traditional farmers. About 1.8 million trees are harvested a year, and most of those, 95%, are sold outside of the province. Our livestock industry is fairly strong, with particular strength in the supply-managed sectors of dairy and poultry. Cattle farmers, and they have a particular challenge for abattoirs since there's a smaller number of producers, there's a smaller number of abattoirs. And there's also regulations with federal and provincial laws and exports. Processors are, let me see, I lost my place here. So what happens is the livestock producers are required to ship their cattle out to the Western province, or just Quebec and Ontario, and that increases the cost. So what a lot of them are doing is concentrating on smaller slaughterhouses and focusing on selling their meat within the province. Newfoundland is a bit of an odd one out in agriculture for Atlantic Canada. It has a very rocky landscape. The province is actually nicknamed the Rock. Poor soil and a short growing season make it a challenge to produce many crops. Focus is on potatoes and other root crops, cabbage and broccoli. But let me see, more than 75% of the agriculture income comes from the sales of poultry, dairy products, and eggs. Kind of lost track of where my slides are. There's the dairy products. Since 2001, when Newfoundland and Labrador joined the National Milk Marketing Plan, the province's dairy industry has been expanding. The province was allocated a quota target of 31 million litres of industrial milk product annually by 2016. So that's a double of their production. It's a province that is largely fishery based. So, but as the fishery stocks were decreasing, the people were leaving the province in search of jobs. But what has happened is I've interviewed dairy farmers who are actually moving to Newfoundland to start dairy farming. So that's an opportunity for them. Overall, Atlantic Canada's agriculture and agri-food industry is largely export-oriented. Because of our location on the ocean's edge, the world is at our fingertips. 75% of our exports go to the United States, with Venezuela, Japan, Germany, and Costa Rica following closely behind. So what are we exporting? Potatoes. And potato products are key, followed by blueberries, apples, and maple syrup. For firewater. Based on the success of companies like McCain Foods, Cavendish Farms, and Oxford Frozen Foods, exports of frozen foods increased by 90% between 1996 and 2005. Looking ahead, the province of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland have each set out their own visions for the future of agriculture, but many of the ideas overlap. I skipped some text, so I'm not sure where we are. Okay. New Brunswick is working to enhance farm profitability and business management skills, increase local and global market sales, and ensure sustainable use of soil, water, and air. Nova Scotia is also looking to expand its domestic and global sales. They've set their focus on establishing strong value chains and see the global market, where consumers are willing to pay for quality and distinctiveness, as an area of opportunity. Nova Scotia has also perfected its local sales, knowing that domestic consumers seek a connection with the people who grow their food. In Prince Edward Island, growth of agriculture is focused on differentiation, unique value-added or processed foods, innovation through bioscience and renewable energy, and collaboration between the research, industry, and government partners seeking value chain partnerships for global exports. Thanks.
Hugh, would you like to Quebec, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Hugh.
Judy, tell them about 4-H. I need to know, no, good afternoon, need to know you're there. My name's Hugh Maynard from Quanglo Communications and Consulting. I've been working in the ag communications industry since 1984, and my first IFAJ was in 1988 at Indianapolis. And I'm also the esteemed, underline that word, Secretary-Treasurer of the Canadian Farm Writers Federation, which I've been since 1872, or at least that's what it feels like. I'm going to talk to you about the province of Quebec. Do I have a clicker?
Clicker, right there.
Clicker. Thank you. So Quebec is the largest province in Canada, which most Canadians don't know, 1.5 million square kilometers. If you took Germany, France, and Spain, you could fit them all into that space quite nicely, along with Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Thank you. The farmland, however, is only 6% of that area, which is about equivalent to 1/3 the size of the UK. So as you can see, there's a huge expanse of Northern Territory there that is not used in the agricultural sector. The population is majority French-speaking, 87%, the other 13 being English-speaking and allophones, as we call them, those who are neither English or French. And for those of you, this is a quiz, what is the third largest allophone population in Canada? Come on, Canadians. I've only got 8 minutes. Chinese. And that has taken over from the Italians since the transfer of Hong Kong over to the Chinese authorities, a mass immigration into the country. So we're in a population transition through immigration. Speaking of immigration, the country was more or less founded with the European settlers came in and secured the land from the Aboriginal population starting in 1534 with Jacques Cartier. And then the first settlement was in Quebec City in 1608 with Samuel de Champlain. The first few hundred years, of course, were forestry and fur trading. But one of the interesting features that was brought over from France was the seigneurial system. So when the land was settled and given out to each of it's a sort of a relic of the feudal system, everybody had a very thin slice of land coming off the river. So everybody had access to the river, which when they first settled were the main forms of transportation. Of course, there were no roads. And so Quebec is laid out very much differently from the other provinces in terms of its agricultural land. Of course, then the British arrived in the 1700s. France and Britain were at war, and after the end of the war, the Quebec Act formed the sort of the historical foundations of our country by protecting the civil rights, the culture, and the church, the Catholic Church, for the Quebec French-speaking population, even as the British Empire expanded into Ontario and other parts of North America. We'll skip 200 years because I only have 8 minutes. And in the 1960s, we had what was called the Quiet Revolution, which was a modernization of the Quebec state. We had 2 referendums on independence, the last of which was 1995, which was defeated by 0.5%. It was that close. And what's interesting in connection with agriculture is there was a lot of policies that were targeted on maître chez nous, self-sufficiency, including farming, and hundreds of millions of state dollars in Quebec were put into modernization of the agricultural economy in an attempt to be self-sufficient, and I'll get to that in a second. So at this current time, Quebec is the second largest economy in Canada. We're ranked 37th in the world, just behind Greece. Well, we were behind Greece. I think we're before now. And we export half and we import half of just about everything that we do. And total farm revenue is 7.3 billion Canadian dollars, which is worth more than American dollars too. So this is how things change. Half of that, more than half of that, is in livestock, which is dairy, poultry, and pork. And we have a significant grain sector worth about $2 billion, which has grown significantly. And as Jack pointed out, for some reason, when we talk about agriculture, soft drinks are included in that categorization. So it helps inflate the figures quite a bit. Dairy is the number 1 production in this province, has been for probably 100 years and continues to be, even though the number of dairy farmers has declined significantly. When I started in '84, half the farmers were dairy farmers, and now there are only a quarter of the 36,000 farms in the province. But it is the lifeblood of the economy. That is rock solid, it is stable, it is predictable, and it's profitable. And that's not a crime in farming. And so all of those who have questions about supply management, come and speak to me and Jack afterwards, and I'm allowed to take a position? Yes, absolutely. So one of the consequences of the Quiet Revolution and the modernization of agriculture was the increase in pork production, which was seen, one, as a way of producing food, but also of generating economic activity. And Quebec went, in my lifetime, my professional lifetime, went from virtually zero to the largest hog producer in Canada. And that has now sort of gone back because there are environmental problems. We had the circovirus, the Canadian dollar, it's not so good to export, and all those kinds of issues have sort of set it back quite a bit from what it was even 5 years ago, but it has made a huge difference in the province because also it was a driver for growing corn. Again, when I was at agricultural college in the late 70s, we grew very little corn, mostly for silage for the dairy herds. Now corn is king. It's the largest grain crop in the province due to new hybrids and also climate change. Where we are today, the climate here 30 years ago is now what we have in Quebec, even though we're further north. And also along those lines with new hybrids, we have soybeans. There were no soybeans 30 years ago, and of course they've all been put into production. So this is, some people might not know what it is, but it is our sort of symbolic production, maple syrup. Quebec produces 70% of the world's maple syrup, which we largely export, and that's from the maple trees, which are very specific to growth in the region. And even though it's a very small amount in terms of the total percentage, $150 million out of 7-point-something billion, it is very much a part of our patrimoine and is delicious. I would encourage you to buy some at the airport gift shop on your way home. And it has become commoditized. Like most agricultural productions, it used to be a sort of a rite of spring, and has moved on into the commercial world. One of the things that is unique in North America, perhaps in the world, is the Union des Producteurs Agricoles, which, as the name states, is a union, not an association. It's the sole market, it's the sole organization representing farmers in Quebec by law, and encompasses marketing boards, income insurance, farm credit, and farmland protection as their basic philosophies to support farmers. And all members must pay a membership fee even if they don't want to join the union. So it gives a very strong voice to farmers, perhaps the strongest in the country. Jack nods and says yes, and it is an interesting formula for others to follow if you're interested in power versus representation.
They could be the same.
Effective representation. The local food movement, of course, has become very big in the last few years, and here we have the state emblem of marketing for identifying Quebec products. We probably have the strongest organic market in terms of the number of producers and the sales in the country. I say that by observation, but even still, that's a very small percentage of the total, somewhere around 3%. So it has a long way to go for the produits de terroir, as we call them, but farmers' markets have become quite numerous. And just to squeeze in, the dependence on the American export market has been mentioned and has caused significant impact lately in the horticulture and other sectors. And thinking about the future, because I've got 1 second left, we just had a parliamentary commission on the future of agriculture that put out a green paper, a sort of a draft paper on the policy that we're going to, in the future, distinguish Quebec products, improve competitiveness, and add value to the environment and territory of Quebec. Thank you very much.
Very well. Well, I really am impressed on the discipline on the time. John, do you want to give a snapshot on Ontario?
Thanks, Jack. I'm thrilled to be the one who can officially welcome you here to Ontario. Here in Ontario, we are Canada's diversified agricultural heartland. In the center of the country, we raise more than 200 different commodities, as varied as corn and cauliflower, asparagus and alfalfa, milk, and maple syrup. We all make maple syrup in Eastern Canada, and we're all proud of it. Ontario has a ribbon of productive and diverse soils within 100 to 300 kilometers of the American border, much like Quebec does as well. But we're in the cradle of the Great Lakes, which greatly affects what we can grow. And that land and that soil has drawn people from around the world to farm. Before these lands were settled by people from Europe, our native peoples were early adopters of farming fixed plots of land, especially in Ontario compared to some of the rest of the country. Before 1000 BC, the Iroquois in southern Ontario stopped some of their annual migration to grow crops, which we know as the Three Sisters: corn or maize, squash, and beans. And those crops form a lot of the basis of what we grow today in Ontario. British and French settlers were the first Europeans to cut down the forest, which grew thick on the land in southern Ontario especially, and put large tracts of land into production here. But agriculture looks much different ethnically from those time periods. Today, farmers from mainland Europe form the basis that produce most of our agriculture output, especially those from the Netherlands. If you want to talk about hogs, the estimate is about 3/4 of our hogs are produced in Ontario from farmers of Dutch heritage, and it's probably, the numbers maybe a bit less than that, but getting in that range for milk as well. Other immigrant influences in Ontario include farmers from Germany, Ireland, Switzerland, and Belgium, along with continued immigration from the United Kingdom. They see Ontario as a good place to farm and live, And we believe some of the world's most progressive farmers have come here to Ontario to farm, bringing an openness to new ways of marketing and creative ways of marketing, and as well modern farming technology. Today's Ontario agriculture relies on our nearby and very large American markets, along with fairly large domestic markets, as Toronto is one of the largest megacity regions of North America. There are tens of millions of people within an 8-hour drive of our main production areas. We also rely on open markets around the world for exports for more than half of our pork and beef, along with our greenhouse production and wheat, soys, and edible beans especially. Dairy farming provides the most farm gate receipts. It's the largest agriculture sector in Ontario, with about 17.3% of the total last year in 2010, followed by fruit, vegetables, and potatoes at 14.6%. Wheat, poultry, hogs, cattle and heifers, eggs, floriculture, nursery, and corn all make up kind of between 5 and 10% of the total. And soybeans are about 11%. And then if you take everything else we produce on the farm, it's about another 10% of the total of $10.3 billion in farm gate receipts in Ontario last year. We have pockets of specialized soils and highly productive land on which we grow specialty crops. An example is something we call the Holland Marsh, which is an area north of Toronto of 9,000 hectares of drained marsh, which are heavy peat soils with extremely high production. The going price of land in the Holland Marsh is about $62,000 a hectare. That region produces 23% of Ontario's vegetables and about 18% of all of Canada's vegetables. As well, the Leamington area, which is our southernmost community, is home to the dominant cluster of greenhouses in North America. Canada has about 1,400 hectares in greenhouse production. Ontario has about 770 of that, and much of that is within about a 20-kilometer radius of the town of Leamington. The U.S., for example, has about 650 hectares of greenhouse production in the whole country. And in between those niche production areas are commodity crops: corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay, and the commodity livestock with hogs, cattle, and sheep. Ontario usually leads the country in farm gate receipt value compared to the other provinces, as it did last year. But we have a relatively small number of hectares in farm production. We have about 5.3 million hectares of farmable land in Ontario. So what we produce here has to have that higher value. And the land is quite expensive in Ontario, and so we have to have that higher value for that as well. Farm numbers continue to decline in Ontario, and like most of the rest of the world, an increasingly large percentage of total production is being done by a smaller number of larger farms. In 2006, there were 57,000 farms in Ontario, but 37,000 of those had farm gate receipts of under $25,000. 10,000 had receipts over $250,000. So we have some challenges in some of our farm sectors. The hog industry in Ontario grew dramatically in the mid-2000s. There was a boom, like in Quebec, only to be cut off at the knees by a 25% rise in the value of the Canadian dollar compared to the American dollar. And as well, country of origin labeling in the U.S. Essentially wrecked what had become an integrated North American market for hogs and pork. There are now a quarter of the hog farmers in Ontario that there were 10 years ago. The beef industry has never fully recovered from the discovery of BSE here in 2003. In Ontario especially, it's struggling to find a place in a shrinking demand in a global market, and especially in Ontario where it's competing for land with better priced and more profitable corn and soybeans and wheat. And there's always discussion about managing and how to deal with our supply management system for milk and poultry. which is the only kind of its type left in the world. So half of Canada's population lives in Ontario, and they compete with the farmers for that nice ribbon of soil in the south of the country. We have one of the world's strongest economies, so that means we compete, there's competition for farm labor. Environmental and animal welfare regulations continue to be tightened, and the consuming public is further from the farm with every generation. Despite those challenges, there's a whole lot of optimism in Ontario agriculture these days. Crop prices are great. The consumer wants to know their farmer. We have a lot of new immigrants that arrive in Canada, and they are settling mostly in Ontario, and they want to be able to see food that they recognize from where they came from. Local food's a definite trend here, with favorites like maple syrup. And goat and sheep farms are growing and profitable both for meat and milk here in Ontario. And our provincial government has brought in an aggressive pricing for alternative energy, and much of that is being produced in the countryside. Corn yields are up about 40% over the last 10 years. Milk production, because he is continuing to become efficient with robotic milking systems. And our hog farmers, despite their market challenges, are still rated as among the most competitive in the world. And beyond the land, our farmers are contributors to their communities with a dedication to family. I tell people that as a farm journalist, there aren't many much better places in the world to work, with successful, prosperous farms and innovative farmers producing an extraordinary diversity of products. And we're thrilled to have you meet some of those farmers over the next couple of days. Thanks.
Laura. Prairies.
I need to start by saying this isn't fair because I have to do 3 provinces in 8 minutes. So, and I also expect, oh yeah, that's true, but I have a big region. I also expect, with all the food we've been eating in the last day and a half and will be eating, I expect that we all go home with a degree in applied agriculture. I have the green area in the middle there, and I think the first thing that I want to say about this region, when you think of randomly about the place that's home, is it's big. And I had the privilege last week of traveling from Manitoba to right through across the prairies to BC, and no picture, nothing I can say to you today to illustrate this would substitute for you getting into a vehicle at some point in your life, and it is something you have to do in your lifetime, is drive across the prairies. And only then will you see the expansiveness and the beauty of these wide open spaces. We stretch from the Manitoba-Ontario border to the Rocky Mountains. There's about 121 million hectares. What is 121 million hectares? I was talking to one of our visiting delegates from Germany today, and I asked him, if you got into your car and drove from one side of the country to the other, you know, how many kilometers, how many hours? And it's about 600 kilometers. Well, that covers crossing Manitoba, which is the most eastern province. So you could pick up Germany, put it into the province of Manitoba, and fill up maybe 2/3 of it. This is the population of Saskatchewan. I say that, but I mean, I'm exaggerating, but only a little, because if you compare, again, our friends in Germany, in that area that they occupy, there's 90 million people living. And in those 3 prairie provinces, we have a total of 6 million people. The province of Saskatchewan has just over 1 million, Manitoba just over 1 million, and Alberta a whopping 3 million people. So with all of that space, and we have 82% of Canada's agricultural land in that region. So there's a lot of expansiveness and a lot of opportunity for agriculture to continue to grow there. Our descendants and our ancestry is mostly European at this point. The first settlers that came, and that's the other thing about our history that kind of jumps out at me, is most of our settlers, most of our settlement were people that were either forced or tricked into coming here. Our first farming settlers, just next year will be 200 years. And if you're from Europe, 200 years is like yesterday. 200 years ago, in 2012, the Selkirk settlers were starving farmers from Scotland that were transplanted into southern Manitoba. And it was many decades later, in 1885, that the railways were looking for passengers, and the Canadian government wanted people out there because, in fact, the experts said you couldn't farm out there. But the Canadian government said, well, if we don't do it, the Yankees are going to take it. So they needed people. So they put these posters up all over Europe, and people went for it. All they had to do, they could get 160 acres of free land. And the only catch was you had to build a house, and you had to live in it for 3 years and develop 40 acres. Well, there's all these, there's no trees. So people had to come out and build houses out of mud to live. And it was very difficult. But people survived because they had to. And it wasn't just the forces of nature they had to withstand, they were captive to these railways and to the grain companies. And as Jack pointed out earlier, they cooperated, and that's how they made it through. So we had these very powerful farmer-owned cooperatives that later moved into the Canadian Wheat Board, which helped put Canada on the map. Ironically, that debate over its future right now is simply tearing us apart out there. We have a very strong cattle industry. Traditionally, they've been grazed out in the pastures and then brought into holding pens in the winter. Now we've moved more and more to something called swath grazing, where they live on the landscape all winter long. In the further west, you will get into feedlot situations, but in Manitoba, it's mainly cow-calf production. We have a very strong hog industry, but it's in-housed in barns, and we also have some dairy, but most of our livestock would be beef and hogs. It's cold, but as we say in Canada, it's a dry cold. It's not unusual for us to see winter temperatures of -35, and you think of cattle out there on the prairie in that. And in the summer, it can get very hot. It can also go to +35. In the early days, our European settlers brought their farming methods with them, and they were working with, in Europe, soil that is several feet deep. Our prairie topsoil is in places 6 inches deep. And what we had happen was what they called black blizzards in the spring or in the summer. This is from the dirty 30s. So we can have these winter blizzards, but we can also have this kind of thing happening. What this created, though, was a very strong innovation incentive. In order to survive again out there, we've become leaders in zero tillage technology and ways of soil conservation that have made this something. This is something that doesn't happen anymore. It's very dry. Our moist areas receive an average of 300 millimeters of precipitation a year, and some receive less than 200 millimeters. So we've had to find very innovative ways of managing the moisture that we have. In the early days, that was done with summer fallow, which created some of the soil erosion problems. Now, most of the time, it's done with minimum or zero tillage and using herbicides for weed control. We do have great summers, and we have, because we're farther north, we have long hours of sunlight and warm temperatures, and that's created what you call the northern vigor that's made our ability to grow wheat and the kind of quality of wheat that we have. But it's also proven true for canola, and we even do our fair share of vegetables, horticultural production. We have potatoes, in addition to the traditional. I think we're Canada's largest potato grower at this point. We're also very wet. You may have seen this on the news. This has been something that's been happening on the eastern prairies with increasing frequency. We don't know if we're just in a wet cycle or if the climate is actually changing, but it's created some very significant problems with getting a crop seeded. When you have a short growing season, you have to have that crop planted by the end of May, early June, and you're trying to pull it off by the end of August. You don't have a lot of time to mess around with flooded fields in the summer, in the spring. We are world leaders in the export of pulses, peas, lentils, beans, as well as canary and mustard seed. And I think, without getting too far over time, we are very dependent on exports in Western Canada. As much as many of us try, we can't possibly eat everything we produce. 80% of what we grow is exported outside of the region. And so that is a very significant factor in the policies that we're looking for on the trade front. Just one more sentence. It's a land of contrasts. It's a very harsh environment, but it's also very fragile. I would say we're very much a work in progress. We're still trying to figure out how to live there and how to make it work there. But our farmers have been very, very innovative, and they are very quick adapters of technology. As we say in Western Canada, it's kind of like the weather. If you don't like it, wait 5 minutes, because it's going to change. And that's all I can say. Thank you.
Tamara.
Hello, my name's Tamara Leigh. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, and I'm a transplanted prairie girl. I actually grew up in Alberta and got my first appreciation of agriculture there. So when I moved to British Columbia, I told my friends that I was trading canola and cows for wine and cheese. And I found out it was a whole lot more complex. So, British Columbia. British Columbia was one of the later areas to be explored in North America, partly because we are sandwiched between the ocean and the mountains. So coming over land meant you had to go over some fantastic obstacles. And coming by sea, they would have explored earlier, except they missed the major inland port because of the fog. Our first significant industry was forestry, because we have very tall timbers. That was followed by a gold rush when they found gold in the water, and once they followed the riverways along, they found out that there was fantastic soil along these waterways, so they stayed for agriculture. That was quickly refined into an absolutely flourishing marijuana industry, which is still, I think, British Columbia's most famous export. British Columbia is huge. It is 4 times the size of the United Kingdom, and yet within that, we have 6 different ecoregions. So that does make for some growing challenges. Our agricultural land base is only about 5%, so that is an area that's equivalent to the size of the Netherlands, and it's very diverse again. We grow over 200 different commodities. You've heard this from Ontario. All of the ones that they grow, and then some. Fruit, vegetables, nuts. We have the heartland of Canada's hazelnut industry. We have livestock, horticulture, greenhouse production, very profitable eggs and dairy sectors, and, oh wait, I have a clicker. Hey look, there's British Columbia. It's huge. Okay, thank you. I forgot about that. I'm used to talking. The visuals are pretty low on me. Okay, British Columbia's forgotten agricultural production is grain, but we'll get to that later. This is a fantastic map of British Columbia, and you can stare at it for a really long time, because I have. It was actually produced by our agriculture in the classroom folks, so they talk to students in the classroom about agriculture, where their food comes from. And what it illustrates that I think no other map I've ever seen does is the geography and topography of British Columbia, and also the density of the agricultural development along that southwestern corner. And then it really trickles off as you go north. So I'm going to walk you through some of our growing zones. Just quickly on the economics, I'm not a numbers girl, but I have a fantastic publication if you want to know what's going on in terms of the BC agriculture economy. There's a link to it on the IFAJ website. But I'll give you the 10,000-foot overview. Our industry is worth $9.6 billion in gross revenues. Our farm sales are only $2.4 billion. So there's a significant value add in that. We are a good exporting province. We export $2.5 billion worth of goods to 135 different countries. And our top 5 exporting countries are the US, China, Hong Kong, Japan, and South Korea. British Columbia is billed as the gateway to the Asia Pacific. One of the things that is unique in British Columbia is an agricultural land reserve. It was established in 1973 because we were losing agricultural land at a rate of 6,000 hectares per year. When you only have 5% of your land base to work with, that kind of loss is huge. So they put restrictions, they legislated restrictions on agricultural land, and it means that you can only do very important agricultural productive things on that land, but they also include golf courses. That protects about 4.7 million hectares. So let's begin our tour. This is in Delta, actually. So this is it's right next door to Vancouver. Lots of urban encroachment in this area, very intensive agriculture that happens through what we call the Lower Mainland and then up into the Fraser Valley. Greenhouses, in terms of greenhouse vegetable production, we are number 2 in Canada for tomato and peppers. We are number 2. We're also number 2 in mushroom production. There's intensive field vegetable production here, and there's some more greenhouses. Cranberries. We're the number 1 producer of cranberries in Canada, and the cranberries are quite interesting. This is a very characteristic scene of the harvest. So they plant these bushes, they build dikes around the field, and then when it's time to flood the fields, they let the water in, and they take these big machines and they agitate the water, and they agitate the bushes, and the berries come off and they float like this, and then they basically vacuum them up to harvest them. So it's quite interesting. That's a major export for us, and is pretty much the entire BC production of cranberries is managed, oh my God, there's only 3 minutes left, okay, is managed by a grower-owned cooperative. The Fraser Valley's primary agriculture is dairy, or has historically been dairy, although poultry is huge, and horticulture. I thought flowers instead of vegetables this time. But the story of the Fraser Valley is blueberries. In the Fraser Valley, the blueberries are king. Cultivated high bush blueberries, specifically. We do 95% of Canada's production of cultivated blueberries. We are the largest producer in the world this year, producing 90 million pounds. In 2010, it was a $105 million export industry to US, Japan, Australia, China, and New Zealand. The Similkameen Valley, I'm taking you on the same route that our group took through the BC pre-tour, is one of the transition zones. This is a semi-arid climate, and this is where we get into our tree fruit industry and our wineries. There are over 800 orchards in British Columbia, and apple and sweet cherries are our largest crops. It's worth about $78 million in 2010, and we are again number 1 in Canada for tree fruit production. This is the ambrosia apple. This was discovered, it's a variety that's becoming increasingly popular. It was discovered by chance in the Similkameen Valley in a town called Coston, which is the organic capital of Canada. In the Okanagan Valley, this is our wine region. It used to be filled with orchards, but they found out they could make more money with grapes. Specifically, they found out that if they started growing better grapes and planting the European vinifera varieties, that they could make really good wines and make a lot more money. There are 230 wineries in British Columbia, and in 1990, they introduced Vintners Quality Alliance, which is a standard for winemaking. That really revitalized the wine industry in British Columbia, which was previously known for baby duck. The BC wine industry is mainly reliant on domestic sales, although there are some exports to Asia. Here we go. There we are. These are the most optimistic people in the world. These are BC ranchers. It's the chair of the BC Cattlemen's Association, and Mike Rose, who hosted a lot of the international guests who came with us to BC. Since 2003, British Columbia has lost 2/3 of our cattle herd. 2003 was when they found BSE. 320,000 head of cattle. There are currently 180 to 190,000 head in British Columbia. It's been a 15-year low cycle. This year, it's been reported that they finally broke even with their prices in 2001. It's mainly cow-calf production in British Columbia. They graze, they have small lots on the agricultural land reserve as their home bases, and then they graze up in crown land, government-owned land, that can't be cultivated for any other use. So ranching should be a much bigger industry in British Columbia, and is getting there. We had an 87-year-old fella named Guy Rose, who's done this his entire life, and over dinner he said, well, I think next year is going to be better. All right. This is, like I said, BC's forgotten agricultural commodity. They grow 115,000 tons of grains and oilseeds, wheat, canola, barley, and oats. It's very north, even by prairie standards. So short season varieties, I know, they ship to 60 different markets, $41.8 million. And I almost was finished my presentation when I remembered that I forgot Vancouver Island. So this is the Ehrlich family, and they're fairly representative of the kind of agriculture you'll find on Vancouver Island and actually throughout a lot of British Columbia. They're small lot farmers, highly diversified. So on their farm, they're growing, they have a community-supported agriculture project, and then they have a cafe that they've built where they sell their farm-produced goods. It's really the way that the industry in British Columbia is going in order to sustain itself. There's very little provincial government investment in that province. And then speaking of the innovators, because that's what BC agriculture is all about, diversity, resilience, and innovation, this is a tea farm on Vancouver Island. So ever the optimists, if you can't make it in cattle, if you can't make it in grain, you can plant tea. And in 2 years, they will be going for a Cowichan Valley tea appellation. So thank you very much.